So the IFS has told us it could mean 20 or 30 billion pounds in tax rises, or even more cuts to government spending.
That he sees north of 3% as an absolute minimum that all of the member states in Europe need to meet.
Britain prides itself as a NATO leader, but did you know the UK is falling behind its own defence spending promises? Now, NATO's latest demand takes it to a new extreme. The UK isn't just being asked to step up, it may be forced.
Understands that NATO will pile on the pressure for the UK to make big increases in defence spending in an attempt to keep the US and Trump on board.
What's happening behind these closed-door pressures? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. Why is NATO demanding more from the UK now? Well, Britain's current defence spending plans already push the limits of what its economy can handle. The government has committed to spending 2.5% of GDP on defence by 2027, with a vague promise of hitting 3% in the next parliament. But here's the problem. Even reaching 3% requires political will and long-term financial sacrifices that go well beyond what most policymakers or the public are prepared for. Now, NATO's push for 3.5%, plus an additional 1.5% for infrastructure, feels more like a mandate than an ask, leaving the UK with very little room to manoeuvre.
That he sees north of 3% as an absolute minimum that all of the member states in Europe need to meet.
At the heart of this increased pressure is Jens Stoltenberg, NATO's Secretary General, who's been vocal about the alliance needing to step up its spending on hard military power. This isn't a minor adjustment, it's a dramatic shift in priorities, with a clear message that European powers, including Britain, need to do far more to shoulder their share of the defence burden. Add in the fact that Stoltenberg also expects infrastructure and logistical capabilities to be ramped up, and you're talking about reshaping entire budget frameworks. For a country like the UK, which only recently struggled to fund pandemic recovery efforts, the demand for as much as 5% of GDP on defence feels overwhelming. Some NATO allies are already responding. Germany, historically reluctant to spend big on its military, has taken steps towards meeting higher targets.
But across Europe, leaders are finding new ways to spend more on the military. Even Germany, once a champion of fiscal prudence.
Poland too has surged forward, now committing upwards of 4% of GDP. And the United States? It's watching all of this closely. For years, it's called on Europe to reduce reliance on American military support, a demand that gained traction under Donald Trump but hasn't dissipated under Joe Biden. If allies like Britain fail to meet these goals, they risk losing credibility, not just with NATO, but with Washington. The stakes are more than financial. If Britain can't hit 3.5%, its position as a leader within NATO could be at risk.
And he wants European allies to step up and do much, much more to defend themselves. And that, of course, requires funding.
This isn't just about pleasing Stoltenberg. It's about retaining the special relationship with the US, bolstering alliances, and proving its place on the world stage. But meeting NATO's demands could also force uncomfortable trade-offs at home, a point that the government can't ignore. With NATO demanding 3.5% of GDP for defence, the UK government faces a daunting challenge: how to justify billions in new military spending when public services are already strained. Rising inflation, stretched healthcare systems, and the ongoing cost of living crisis make the optics of this demand almost as significant as the numbers themselves. For many, the government's apparent hesitation isn't just about meeting NATO's expectations, it's about balancing the economic priorities at home with geopolitical pressures abroad.
Has broken a story that NATO is urging the UK to increase military spending to 3.5% of our GDP.
Yet Whitehall insiders believe this delay is more of a stalling tactic than a firm rejection, suggesting the government may eventually give in to NATO's terms. The Ministry of Defence's reaction to this hesitation adds an element of internal friction. Reports indicate that officials find the government's caution amusing, almost inevitable. Beneath that humour, however, lies a serious concern: the gap between Britain's current budgets and the increasing military commitments. Defence analysts argue that meeting 3.5% would require not just cutting corners, but a complete reshuffle of national priorities. When converted into real terms, this increase could total tens of billions of pounds, enough to fund significant expansions in education or healthcare. Instead, it would reinforce infrastructure, maintain naval fleets, and develop cutting-edge weapons. This dilemma isn't confined to spreadsheets or political soundbites. It cuts to a broader question about Britain's identity. Should the nation focus on repairing damage at home or maintaining its global status as a military leader?
Stands the UK will be forced by NATO to increase defence spending to 3.5% of GDP by 2035.
Framing this issue as warfare versus welfare reflects the uneasy divide over what truly defines national strength. Public opinion often leans toward prioritising domestic services, but failing to meet NATO's demands could strain alliances, especially the close partnership with the US. The risk of alienating Washington by resisting these new defence targets may weigh even heavier on the Prime Minister's decision calculus. The government's messaging now revolves around global responsibility. Meeting NATO's demands could be spun as a necessary step to ensure security against threats like Russia or China.
Around 3.5% of GDP for each European ally and Canada to be spent on hard military power.
But selling this to a public increasingly frustrated with underfunded domestic systems won't be simple. The question is, can Britain walk this tightrope without unravelling its internal stability? The UK's decision on NATO's defence spending targets isn't just about finances. It's a defining moment that will shape its place in a rapidly shifting global order.
So the IFS has told us it could mean 20 or 30 billion pounds in tax rises, or even more cuts to government spending.
Meeting the 3.5% demand signals a commitment to leadership within NATO and a steadfast alliance with the United States. But falling short could strain these critical relationships and weaken Britain's influence. A senior defence source warned that credibility as a leading NATO member is at stake. The real question is, can the UK afford to delay? This isn't just about military budgets, it's about whether Britain can hold its place as a global power.